So congratulations once again on making it to the end of the CSS section of this course. You've gone from almost no knowledge of CSS to exactly how to implement it into your pages, and then some really quite advanced CSS techniques involving pseudo classes, layouts, selectors like classes and IDs, and a lot more. So now's your chance to use all of those skills and create something real. The challenge I'm about to set will definitely be the toughest challenge that you've had so far in this course. But I hope that you'll learn the most from it as well. So what we're going to be doing is cloning this page, the BBC News website. And I've chosen the tech page, not because I don't like Asda, but as an upcoming web developer, you should definitely be keeping up with the latest tech developments. So creating something like this is definitely not going to be easy, but the more effort you put into figuring stuff out yourself, the more you'll learn from it. So one option is to follow along with me as I recreate this page, which is perfectly fine, but I would certainly recommend at least attempting recreating parts of it on your own. You've got all the skills and techniques that you need, and if you've forgotten any or want to try something else, there's always Google to figure out something more advanced. So if you possibly can, have a go at it yourself before you watch the videos and follow along with me. One word of warning, don't necessarily be too fussy. We're not going to use the exact same font, and some of our layouts might not be exactly the same as this site, but it'll be close enough that the layman probably couldn't tell the difference, at least at first glance. One final thing before we begin. Of course, the news on whatever day you're doing this is going to be different to what I'm seeing here. I think that's a plus, and it will give you the opportunity to do something slightly different to what I've done. But if you want the exact same page that I'm going to be working with, then you can jump to completewebdevelopercourse.com/clone. And we're going to be doing it without the cookie message at the top. So this is the exact page, and this is not going to change. I'm going to go as far as about this line here, so where that grey line is all the way along, because I don't think you'll necessarily want to watch me for hours and hours recreating the whole page. We'll just do that top part there. If you want to be super creative, feel free to choose another website to clone, or do this one and then do a different one. But I think the BBC site is a great looking site. You'll learn a huge amount by attempting to copy it as well. One final word of warning, don't attempt to try and recreate the responsiveness of the site. So the BBC website is responsive, which means that it looks different and lays out nicely regardless of the screen width. We're not going to try and recreate that at this stage. We don't have the techniques, but we will be covering them later on in the course. So all you're aiming to do is create something that looks like this. I also wouldn't worry too much about making it look exactly right in every browser. Focus on getting it right in Chrome, and your cross-browser development skills will come along as the course goes on. All right then, so good luck. I hope you enjoy the challenge. And when you've done it, do come back and watch me give it a shot. Okay, here we go then. So I'm going to start by creating a new page. So I'm going to do that within brackets. So we'll go to File, Save As. You obviously do it in your text editor. And then I'll just call it bbc.html. Save it there. And then we'll get rid of the style from the previous video, and we'll change the title so that that matches technology-BBC News. So I've just copied that from up there. And then let's jump over and change this so that we're looking at the right page in our browser. Okay, and a quick check is always good. There we are. And we've got the right website title as well. All right then, here we go. Deep breath. I'm going to essentially start from the top left and work my way along. And that bar at the top definitely looks to me like a good place to start with a div. Definitely, that's a section of the page which is different to everything else. So let's start there. And we'll create our div. And I'm going to give it an ID of top bar. because it's the bar at the top of the page. Now, it's got a white background, or at least it looks white to me. I'm going to use the color picker just to check that it is. Yes, it is. So all those F's in the middle are a complete white, so I don't need to give it a particular background. What I do need to do is center it. So you can see there it's got a fixed width, but it is centered in the page. So as far as my clone is concerned, I could forget that centered bit, but I would quite like to do it. So let's have a quick Google to see if we can work out how to center a div within the page. Oh, there we go. Center div in page. That looks good. That takes us to stackoverflow.com. If you haven't discovered stackoverflow.com yet, then you haven't been Googling enough to work out how to do things, because it comes up all the time. It's a great site. So it looks to me that we can center our div by giving it a fixed width and then setting the margin to 0 and auto. So that's going to be a 0 margin at the top and the bottom and an auto margin on the left and right. So that should center it for us. Great. So let's do that. So for our top bar, we're going to use hash and then top bar, and we'll experiment a bit with the width. I think about 1,000 pixels is likely to be about right. And then, as we saw, we want margin 0 and then auto. And I'm actually just going to give it a temporary background color so that I can see how wide it is. And I think we'll need to give it a height as well. So we'll experiment with that. My guess would be around 40 pixels. Okay, let's take a look. So there we go. Excellent. So I think that looks good. It's about the right width and height, but we do have this bar at the top there, which I want to get rid of. We did see how to do that a few videos ago. I wonder if you can remember. It's just a matter of setting the body margin and padding to 0. So that should now align it to the very top left. There we go, or to the very top anyway. Left only if it happens to be smaller than 800 pixels. Okay, so now we can get rid of our background color. And the first thing we're going to want is this BBC logo. So I'm just going to steal it directly from the page by right-clicking or control-clicking and then save image as. Then I'm actually going to create a new folder called images. You don't have to do this, but it's quite a neat way of keeping all your images separate from your HTML files. And I'm going to call this BBC logo. Okay, so now we've got BBC logo.png. So let's pop it in and see what it looks like. So we add an image using img, and then we want src, and it's going to be in images / and I even get that nice auto predict there. Brilliant. Let's take a look. Fantastic. So I'm very happy with that, but it is at the top of the page and we want it down slightly. So I'm going to give it a margin at the top. So let's give it an ID of logo. It's definitely an ID because there's only one logo. And then with the logo, I want to set a margin top of, let's say, 5 pixels. Let's have a look at that. Okay, I think we could make it a little bit more than that, maybe 8. Remember, we're not worrying about purely pixel perfect here, but that looks about right. It's definitely a bit smaller by default as well, so I'm going to stretch it out a bit. Let's try giving it a width of maybe 120 pixels. Okay, a little too big. Let's try 100 pixels. Okay, that looks about right to me. All right, so now we've got our logo. The bit to the right of here, we want a nice vertical border there. And we've actually got those to separate out each of these. So I'm going to create a class for those with a border on the left. So we'll need to float the logo to the left because we're going to want to put other things to the right of it. And then let's create this sign in div. So we're still inside the top bar here. And we'll call it sign in div. There we go. Now we want it floated left and we want it with a border to the left. And we're going to want that for all of the top bar sections here. So I'm going to create a class of top bar section. And then I'm going to assign those styles to that. So we want them all to float left. And we want this border left. And let's try 1px grey solid. See how that looks. And there's nothing there. That's interesting. I suspect that's because we don't have a height yet. So let's make it a height of 100% so it will completely fill the top bar. And there we go. So now we can see it. It needs a bit of work. So I think I'm going to add a margin to the right of my BBC image. So that's logo here, just to spread that out. And let's have a look. How wide do we want this to be? About the same as the distance from the top. So let's try a margin right of 8 pixels. Okay, that looks pretty good. We haven't got the color right though, so let's use our color picker to pick a color from the page and then try and isolate the color that we want. It's pretty tricky to do at this scale, so I'm going to zoom in as much as I can, and we can see that it's 1 pixel here. It's tricky to get it just right, but I think it's that CCCCC there. That looks like the right sort of grey to me. So let's jump back and change the border color from grey to hash CCCCCC. Let's take a look. Okay, that looks much better. Great, I'm going to fix the height later on because I want to put some content in first. So let's zoom out again. So we've got two things here. We've got this image and then we've got the sign in text. So let's zoom in. And if we right click on this image, you'll see that we can't actually download it directly. So I'm actually going to use the screen grab tool on the Mac, which is Command Shift 4. And that will allow me to select the image and save it to my desktop. If you're on Windows, you can use the snipping tool to do the same thing. Or if you have problems with that, you can always download it from the zip at the end of this section, which gives you the whole of my version of the BBC page. So I'm going to go back over to Finder, and there's the file. So it's a screenshot and then the date and time. I'm going to change that to sign in image. And then I'm going to copy it to the clipboard and pop it in my images folder. There we go. So now let's jump back over and add that in. So we're going to put this in the sign in div, and it's an image with an src of images and then sign sign-in image.png. There we go. Okay, let's have a look. All right, so we've got it. It's a little larger than we need. So let's give it an ID of sign-in image and then use a bit of CSS to customize that. So we'll create a sign-in image selector and then we'll set the width. Let's try 10 pixels. Ooh, a little bit small. 40 pixels, a bit too big. 30 pixels. We zoom out again. I think that looks about right. We want the same kind of height as the BBC logo, so I like that. And we'll need some margin for it as well. We want a top margin and a left margin. So let's see if we can do a margin all the way around. Let's try 8 pixels. Okay, that looks pretty good. I think that is about right, although the left margin is actually a little bit more. So I'm going to change that. So we've got 8 pixels at the top and maybe 15 pixels on the left. Let's just have a look at that. There we go. I think that looks a little better. It's maybe a bit large. So let's make it slightly smaller. And give it more of a margin at the top. Okay, that looks better. Touch more margin at the top, I think, bring it down a little bit. Brilliant. Okay, so next bit is this sign in text. So we're going to need to change the font and make it bold. So let's add in that. Just make sure I get the capitalization right. So it's sign in with a small I. There we go. Okay, so we definitely want to float this image to the left so that it's to the left of our sign-in text. So let's just add that in. That's better. And now let's get this font right. Now I'm going to show you a little trick. I think we'll use the same font throughout. So if we select a certain bit of text, right click or control click in Chrome and then inspect, this will give us a bit of information about that particular text. And the computed section is particularly useful because it gives you a bit of information about that text. So that can be really handy. We're going to particularly focus on the font family. There we go. So the font family is something called Helmet. I think I'm going to go for just this last bit here. So Helvetica, Arial and Sans Serif. Because I suspect these ones are custom fonts for the BBC site. So let's see if we can change the font. And we're going to want to change the font for pretty much everything. So let's do that within our body tag. And we want to set the font family to Helvetica, Arial, and then sans serif if we can't get either of those. So let's have a look. That should change the font of our sign-in. Fantastic. So I think this can be a span, because it's not quite a paragraph on its own. So we'll call it sign-in text. And we don't need to do a lot with it. We need to make it bold, maybe change the size and then move it down a touch. I'm actually looking at the sign-in image there. I think it should be slightly higher. See if that looks better. So Let's take our sign in text selector and we want font weight bold. I'm going to make it a touch smaller. Font size, let's try 90%. And then let's try moving it down around 11 pixels. Okay, I'm liking the size and font weight. It's not liking my margin top though. So I suspect that's because it doesn't want to apply a margin to a span. So let's try doing it with positioning instead. So we'll give it a relative positioning with a top of 11%. 11 pixels, sorry. There we go, that looks good. So it's moving down. I think we need to move it a bit further. 15 pixels. Slightly too far. 14. Okay, I'm liking that. Okay, that looks pretty similar. You'll notice that there is this nice color that appears on mouse over here. We're not going to be recreating that. We don't have the skills for that yet, I'm afraid. If you want to check out how to do that with JavaScript, then feel free. It's not too tricky, but it's definitely beyond our abilities right now. Next then, we've got this slightly strange wiggly line there. I'm going to use Command-Shift-4 again to take a screenshot of that. I'll try and get it as accurately as I can. And I recommend doing the same thing with the snipping tool down to the bottom. And while I'm here, I'll do the same thing for the bell. There we go. So let's find those. There they are. So I'll rename this one bell. And I'll call this one wiggly line. Now you can see I've copied some of the top of the screen there. If you're on a Mac, there's an easy way to fix that. You can just double click on your image and then zoom in and select the bit that you want to keep, and then use Command K to crop, and then you're left with just the bit that you want. So that's really useful. You'll need to use an image editor if you're on a PC to do the same thing, or you could just use the images in the zip file at the end of this section if you'd rather. So let's select wiggly line and bell, and then copy them back into our images folder. All right, so our wiggly line is going to go somewhat to the right of sign in there. So I think it deserves its own div. Which is going to be here. So we're still inside top bar, but we're not in sign in div at the moment. I'll call this one bell div. There we go. And then the first thing that we're going to want in our bell div is our image, which is going to be our wiggly line.png. So let's just have a little look about that. Okay, that's fine, but it's obviously a little bit large. I suspect we'll need to mess around with that later, but let's just give it a height for the moment. I'll give it an ID of wiggly line, which is probably not the sort of professional sounding ID that you'd want to use in a final page, but it will do for our purposes. So wiggly line. We're going to want to float it left, and let's give it a height of, well, for now we can put 40 pixels, which is the same height that we gave the top bar originally. So that will do for now. We might need to perfect it when we've got everything in place. Obviously it's pretty close to sign in there. So what I'm going to do to fix that is give my sign in text span a right padding of, let's say, 50 pixels. See how that looks. Okay, I'm happy with that. I think that's about the right sort of distance along. Great. Now we're going to bring in our bell. So that's just going to go next to our wiggly line. So image, we'll call it bell, src is images, and then bell. Let's have a look. Okay, great. Happy with that, but obviously we need to make it a little bit smaller. So let's try a height of 15 pixels. See how that looks? Oh, a little bit too small. Maybe 25 pixels. Okay, yep, I like that. And then let's give it a margin. So let's try a top margin of around 12 pixels and a left and right margin. Let's do it about the same, 12 pixels as well. Okay, that's definitely a little bit too much. Maybe 10, maybe 9. Okay, that'll do, and it's a little bit far from the wiggly line as well, so let's make that 10. Maybe still too far. Try 8. Okay, we can play with that and see how it looks. Now we're going to have our relatively easy bits, hopefully news, sport, weather, iPlayer, etc. So let's bring in a new class for those. So after the bell div, I did float the bell div left, did I? No, I didn't. So let's do that. There we go. So that means that everything will be to the left of it. Now these ones I think don't need a specific ID because they're all the same, but they will need a specific class. In fact, they might need 2 classes. They all have a margin left and they're all going to be floated left. So we can use the top bar section class for all of them. There we go. And then that first one there is just news. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so it looks fine, but I think we're going to need to make it bold, maybe a touch smaller, and we're going to need to add some margins to it. So let's call this top bar menu as well. So we've got 2 classes. And then specifically to top bar menu, we'll have a font weight of bold and a font size of, let's try 90%. We might not need it. And then we'll have a margin of, what did we have before? Actually, what worked for the sign-in text? 14 pixels. Let's try that. And we'll try 15 left and right as well. Okay, yes, I didn't mean margin. I definitely meant padding. Okay, so yeah, we're getting there. We've got much too much left margin there, and I think we need to move it up maybe just a touch. Let's try 13 pixels there. 15 pixels, and let's have 0 padding at the bottom, but then keep our 15 pixels on the right. See how that looks. Okay, that hasn't helped our problem with our line, so let's try specifying a particular height. Remember, the height is going to be plus the padding. So if we want the whole height of this thing to be 40 pixels, then we need to take away the padding at the top, which is 13 pixels. So that leaves us with 27 pixels. So let's have a look. Okay, that looks a lot better. Great. We might have to fiddle around with that a little bit later on, but that looks good enough for now. All right, so now we've got some easy bits. We just need to add sport, weather, iPlayer, TV, and more. So let's do that by copying these divs. So see if I can remember them. Sport. Nope, I can't. Sport, weather, iPlayer, TV, and more. There we go, let's have a look. All right, I think for the first time it's starting to take shape. I'm liking that. We do need a little down arrow there. We're not going to bring in this fancy menu there, but I will put the down arrow in. I suspect we'll need to do a little screenshot of it. That should be fine. There we go. So same as before, if you can't get that for whatever reason, then just grab it from the zip at the end of this section. So there's the more arrow, and let's bring that into our images folder. There we go. And then that's just going to go after more. So let's bring that in. Image with a source, and then images, more arrow. There it is. So we want it moved along a little bit, and of course the right size. So I'm liking the position, actually. That works quite well. So give it a more arrow ID. And then I think we need to change the size first of all. So let's try a width of 6 pixels. And we definitely want a margin left of, let's say, 15 pixels. Oh, definitely a little bit small. 16 pixels. Okay, yeah, that looks better. And maybe 20 pixels there, space it out a little bit. Great. All right, so that's looking good. Let's jump back over and see what we need to make next. So all we've actually got left in this top bar is this search box here, which is going to be a text input with a little bit of styling to get that image in the background. All right, so let's see if we can pull that off. We definitely need a new section. So let's create a new div with a class of top bar section. And then we'll start off just by putting an input with a type of text and seeing how that looks in itself. Okay, so we've got the input, but that's not quite what we're after. So let's do a little bit of work to try and make it look like that. So we're going to need to make it wider. We're going to need to set the background to that grey colour. There it is. And we're going to need the magnifying glass image. So while I'm here, I'm going to use Command-Shift-4 again. You can use the snipper tool if you're on Windows. And I'm just going to copy that to the desktop. And there it is. So I'll call it magnifying glass. And then I've just copied it again to Command-C or Control-C, and I'm going to paste it into the images folder with all our other images. There we go. So let's start by putting it about the right shape and size and that background. I think I've just lost the background color again. There we go. So I'll grab it again to the clipboard. So let's give this an ID of search box, and then create some styles to make it look how we want. So we'll start off with a background color, as that's in the clipboard. And that's going to be that number there, so that looks about right. We don't want any border here. So I'm just going to put in border none. Okay. We definitely want it a little bit taller than it currently is. But we might achieve that with padding. Let's have a look at just putting some text in there. So we definitely want to style that text a little bit. Try bold font weight first of all. And I think a little bit bigger. Yep. So let's try a font size of, start off with 14 pixels. I think that looks about right. And then we'll have a little bit of padding. Try out 5 pixels. Okay. I'm liking that. I think that's about close enough. We then definitely want a bit of margin. Okay, that looks pretty good. I think that's about right. You can obviously play with those depending on how much of a perfectionist you are. All right, so just before we add that image in, let's have another quick look at how it actually works. If we take a look at this search box here and drag the mouse over, we can actually see that the image is separate to the search box itself. So what we actually want to do is get our image to appear on the right of the search box. And it will be nice to do it in such a way that clicking on the magnifying glass does the actual search for us. Obviously, we're not going to create a functional search engine here, but we can do that last bit quite easily. So let's see how we achieve that. Our default way, if we just had an image, would be just after the input to have an image with an src of images and then magnifying glass. And we'll give that an ID of magnifying glass. There we go. And we're going to need to add a float left to the search box to make that float nicely. And then for now, let's just leave that blank and see how that looks. Okay, so we've overlapped our 800 or so pixels. I think that's fine. Let's make it a little bit smaller. And we're also going to want to remove the margin from the right of the search box as well. So let's change our margin to 5 pixels and then 0 and then 5 pixels. 5 pixels. And that should remove that margin so they're nice and together. Now I'm not happy with the coloring there. It doesn't seem to match up. So let's try that again. Just grabbing the right color. Doesn't seem to be working too well for me here. Okay, let's try that. E4, E4. Okay, that's a lot better. Excellent. So let's get this height right. Start off at around 15 pixels. Okay, that's handy. We're now in the right range. but we need to make it a little bit bigger. So let's go for 25 and let's add a margin top of 5 pixels as well. Okay, now we're looking good. So I think we need a couple more pixels in the height. Let's go for 27. There we go. Okay, that looks great. Now, what we can't do at the moment is what I mentioned earlier, which is click on that image. But I'm going to show you a nice and easy way that we can do that. All we need to do is change our image to an input with a type of image. And then that will make it clickable. And if we had a proper form there, that would actually submit the form as well. So you can see that that's now clickable and effectively does the same thing as a submit button. Of course, we don't have a form here. It won't actually submit, but if it did, we would. So that's as far as we're going to go on this video. Our top bar is now more or less complete. In the next video, we're going to create the news section there in red and then the menu underneath. I hope you're staying with me and that you're learning a lot at the same time. I'll see you in the next video.